Hi class, today what we're going to do is a simple lesson, just a portion of chapter 7 section 8, factoring by grouping. And it at first sight it looks kind of complicated, but let me explain how this works. Before we get to the first question, as you see here, it says, before we start, let's look at a special case of factoring a greatest common factor that's a binomial. But before we do that, I'm just going to ask you the following. Say I have an expression a to the x plus or minus b to the x. And I ask you to factor out a greatest common factor. In this case, we have two terms, and the common factor that they both have is x. So what I do, you remember, is I'll take the x out, and then I divide each of those terms by x. So in the end, I get x equals x times, a minus b, right? Well, what I want to do here is, in this first problem, what I want to do is take this a to the x, and instead of an x, what I'm going to do, here the original problem, remember, is a to the x minus b to the x. But instead of an x, what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace that x down here with a binomial x minus 4. So instead of an x, I'm going to write an x minus 4, which is a binomial, but a binomial can also be seen as just a single number. So if you look, both of these terms, right, both this number and this number have an x minus 4 in common. God, I have to go to sleep early today. So anyway, let's go ahead and see what that looks like. So what I want to do, see if you can follow along with what I'm doing, is I'm going to take that x minus 4 out. So let me do that the way we've done that in the past. Go ahead and erase a little of this because I'm want to make some space over here. And here I'm going to write those parentheses out here, and I'm going to take an x minus 4 out of there. See that x minus 4? And to take that x minus 4 out, just like I took the x out, I have to divide both of these terms by the x minus 4. Well, the x minus 4 will cancel with this x minus 4, and it just leaves me with a in the parentheses. Let me go ahead and put this x minus 4 down here for us. And this x minus 4 cancels with this x minus 4, leaving me the minus b. So this is what we call this is part of a technique called factoring by parts. We need to have this skill before we can go to varsity level. So I hate to say it, but this is the JV level. So again, let's keep going until we finally make sense, okay? So looking at this next problem, there's really technically just two numbers here, and they both share the binomial x plus 2. So what I'm going to do is take the x minus 2 out, x minus 2, and again, if I'm going to have this multiplication by x minus 2, I need to divide to keep everything even. Divide by the x plus 2. Sorry. Why do I keep that? Anyway, someone's just going to have to correct my talking today. But anyway, this cancels here. The x plus 2 cancels there. So what am I left with? I'm left with this x plus 2 that I just took out. And times what's left here is the a plus b. Got that? And you can get pretty quick with this too, but right now I'm going to go and give you the full blown up version of this. Okay, so now looking at this next one, again, they have a common, each of these two terms both possess a common binomial factor of x plus 3. So let's go ahead and take that x plus 3 out. And I know some of you go right to that final step, and that is absolutely fine, but this tells us exactly what we're doing. And again, x plus 3's cancel here. Okay, that's because I'm dividing them out. That's what I wanted it to do. And I have x plus 3 from here. And inside the parentheses, I've got the x squared left. And I have the top positive 2 left. And that's as far as I can factor it. I'm not sure how many of you can do this next one, but I'd like to pause right now and give you guys an opportunity to do this next problem. So if you could just pause the video and in your notebook, hopefully by now you know to get either a notebook or copy this blank sheet off my essay and do it that way. But I'm going to pause right now and I'll give you the answer in a minute and you take a look. Hopefully it'll match what you did. Okay, I kind of did this in a shortcut method. Some of you may have already gotten to this point. If not, don't worry about it. But I just saw the x plus 2, and I took the x plus 1. What is going on? I take the x plus 1, and I'm going to put it out in the front. And then once I take that x plus 1 out, there's only an x left and a y left. And I put them inside the parentheses. So there you go. One of the things that they suggest in the book is, to just underline the factor that we're taking out, to just so you can just see it as one number unit. Again, with this one, if you do the shortcut method here, you can just put the x plus 3 out of here and go, okay, well, when I take that x plus 3 away from the first term, what do I have? I will have x squared left. And over here, I have that plus 2 left. All right. Well, anyway, that's a technique that you're going to be using in a moment. And so hopefully that makes sense. If it does not, please go back and do it, because otherwise you'll be incapable of doing the next page. The next page is the last page and and if you understand it, is all you're going to need to do the homework. It's all you need to understand. So let's go to the page. Factoring by grouping. And let's go ahead and let me just read this to you. It says, you have used distributive property to factor out the greatest common monomial from a polynomial. Sometimes you can factor out a common binomial, and that's what we were just doing. All right? You may be able to use the distributive property to factor a polynomial with 4 terms as described below. And so the name of this factoring process is going to be called factoring by grouping. Now, in a moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something, and then suddenly it's going to look familiar. Right now, it doesn't look familiar. And typically, when you see 4 terms, that's your signal that you've got a factoring by grouping problem coming up. So what I'm going to ask you to do when you get 4 terms like this is I'm just going to ask you to divide it, to go ahead and divide it into 2 terms on the left and 2 terms on the right. So, and then if what I want you to do is look at the right side, those 2 terms here, and what I want you to do is factor out a greatest common factor. So what is the greatest common factor here? Think to yourself, it's not just x, it's actually, both of them have an x squared. So I can take the x squared out, and then I divide everything on the inside by x squared. X to the third divided by the x squared is just going to be the x. The 3x squared divided by x squared is just going to be the plus 3. And there, I'm done. I factored out the greatest common factor of the left side. Now I'm going to factor out the greatest common factor of the right side, which in this case is just positive 2. So I'm going to put a plus 2 here and divide everything by 2 to go in the parentheses. That's going to be an x plus 3. Now you see it, guys, right? Now we're back to where we were before. We have an x plus 3 and an x plus 3. And if we go in slow motion, if we want, we can go the long way. I'm going to do the short way the next time. We can take the x plus 3 out and divide everything on the inside by the x plus 3. Noticing, of course, that always cancels, leaves us with x plus 3 times whatever's left in those parentheses. Well, left inside those parentheses is going to be the x squared and the 2. So x squared plus 2. Done. All right. Now on this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some shortcuts. All right. So instead of doing the big pull it out and divide by everything, let's see if we can just take the common factor out right away. Now, if you look at this first one, unfortunately, in this first one, we don't have a common factor for both terms. And so in this case, if I try to factor out the greatest common factor, the first one does not have it. There's nothing, so I'd just write it like this. The second one does have an x. I could factor out the x, and if I divide everything by x here, I get x over x is 1. xy over x is plus y. Notice that there's no common binomial. So this one doesn't look factorable off immediately, but let's do something. Let's see if we can change the grouping a little bit so maybe there is a common factor in both of them. And my suggestion will be to switch this y with this x. And there's actually a few other ways that we can do this. But let's go ahead and do that. So I've got x squared plus x plus y plus xy. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this one. Well, now this one has a common factor. The left side does have a common factor of x. And we divide each of those terms by x. We get x plus 1. And over here, we have a common factor of y. And I'm going to write it as plus y just to make things, I find that if you put the plus sign there, it makes more sense later on. But if I divide everything by y here, I get 1 plus x. Well, 1 plus x and x plus 1 really are the same number. So I'm just going to go ahead and rewrite this as x plus 1. And what's remaining is the x plus the y. Cool. So the difference between A and B is A was all ready to go for you, but B we had to reorder. So if when you divide it in half, you factor the left and the right side and you can't get a common factor, then what you need to do is reorganize the letters so that you may get a common factor. And happily, there's more than one way to get that. So let's go ahead. Right now, you've got some practice ones here. And let's go ahead and pause and do number 1. Again, I'll start you off by just dividing this in half. And I'm just going to give you a hint, too. A greatest common factor can also be a 1. So we can factor out a 1 if we need to. So I'm pausing, and go ahead and give that number 1 a shot. And when you're done, or if you give up, go ahead and start, and we'll do it, and we'll do that one. Okay, I'm wondering how many of you may have pulled this one off, but this is the answer. Now, the trick is what I just said, is that sometimes you can factor out. If you can't factor out anything, go ahead and factor out a 1. So if you divided this in 2, the a squared is what's going to come out. And once I divide each of these terms by a squared, I get a plus 3. Over here on the right side, the only greatest common factor is just going to be 1. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out the 1. I get 1 times x plus 3. Yes, it's key that the two binomials match. If they don't, we can't do this. So we take the x plus 3 out, put it in the front. We divide each of those terms by x plus 3, and we get x squared plus 1. Yay! Okay, let's now in the next one, you know it's going to be like that one on top, B, where you may have to reorder things. Just a hint. So see what you can do. Okay, anyway, if you were able to get this answer on your own, you should pat yourself on the back. The answer is y plus 2 times x plus y. Doesn't matter what order. It could be x plus y times y plus 2. It's right either way. How did I do that? Well, just like I hinted, the answers were in the wrong order. Pretend like I was being honest. What I did is I pretended to factor out the greatest common factor, divided it in half, and noticed that the binomial didn't match. So I needed to reorder. I was kind of clever in picking the order that would make it look a lot neater. You may not have, but anyway, I just put the YX in the front, and pretty much there's several different ways you can get the right order. You can just guess, and likely if you guess, it's going to work. But I noticed that I wanted to get something that had two X's in it, and I wanted something that each had a Y in it. And when you do that, it does work. And there were a couple other combinations that you might have had. So I did it the slow motion way. Take that Y plus 2 out, and then divide everything by Y plus 2. So you can still do that if that makes you more comfortable, and I encourage you to do that if that's what's going on. But anyway, that's what we call factoring by parts. And with factoring by parts, again, what we're going to do is we're going to divide it. Factoring by grouping, sorry about that, is it's also called factoring by parts, by the way, is done by, usually you know it's factoring by grouping if you see four terms. So if on a test and the question just says factor, you see four terms, the chances are, pretty much 99% that it's factoring by grouping. So immediately divide it in half and then factor out a greatest common factor. If the greatest common factor doesn't produce two binomials that match, what I mean by that is, if you look at this one here, the binomial x plus 3 and the x plus 3. Over here, the x plus 1 and the x plus 1. If you get to, what you want to do is to reorder it until you get two binomials that match, and then you factor that binomial out. And so anyway, factoring by grouping, what I have for you for homework is just to do these. And so if you got this right, if you got this idea down, then you should be in good shape. So you can do that homework assignment with me on our next meet session, or you can do it on your own. If you think you got it down now, I'd encourage you to go ahead and think about finishing up, and then maybe I can have you go through a couple problems during our next meet session. You guys take care. Have a nice night, afternoon, or whatever's going on in whatever part of the world you guys are at, and I'll see you soon. Take care now.